tax cuts for people earning $80,000 a year or more. Now, those people would have been pushed up into the next tax bracket in a phenomenon known as bracket creep, which is when wages increase due to inflation and the like. It pushes people into a higher tax bracket. They will be given some relief there, but in terms of any other personal income tax cuts, we're unlikely to see much more there. We're also expecting and it has been confirmed that superannuation tax concessions for high income earners will be scrapped. We will see a $5 billion infrastructure spend, but that's only allocating money that's already in existence from the Asset Recycling Fund, which is a fund set up back in 2014 to compensate states and territories for selling off their own assets, and then this money can then be reinvested into other public infrastructure projects. We're also expecting a company tax cut. The exact details of that are still yet to be seen. So there are a few elements that have been put there, and of course, as you mentioned, this adoption of Labor's policy to increase the levy on cigarettes, on tobacco, by 12.5% year on year. Now, the government's modelling shows that would raise more than $20 billion over the next decade. Labor's modelling, when it released this policy at the end of last year, suggested it would raise more than $40 billion, and some of that money would go towards things such as funding their education policy. So there is a bit of to and froing about that today, and whether or not that shows Labor's modelling, which they got from the Independent Parliamentary Budget Office, was way off, or if it's just a change in the modelling there. So a few things that we know thus far, but as we just heard from Scott Morrison, it's not going to be full of pre-election sweeteners, and that's something that Labor has picked up on this morning. The Shadow Treasurer, when he arrived at Parliament House this morning, spoke to the media and suggested that this is a budget, or will be a budget, devoid of any sort of imagination and devoid of any full economic plan for the country.
High income super, which he railed against, said was an attack on the retirement incomes of Australians. He will adopt a similar policy. The day he adopts Labor's tobacco excise changes. Now, isn't it interesting? Here we are
so far outside political circles to what's been revealed.
Well, because what we've seen so far, it's a fairly modest offering, and it's not going to be, as Scott Morrison has indeed said, full of any sort of pre-election sweeteners. There is a discussion about what effect this is all going to have on that headline figure of the budget deficit. Now, that's something that the coalition has continually pushed as being a result of Labor's mismanagement of the economy when they were in power under Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, and then Kevin Rudd again. So economists have been looking to see what, on a broader picture, what this is actually going to mean, and there is some discussion that by looking at purely spending matters rather than wanting to increase the tax burden, which is something that Scott Morrison is very keen to avoid, they've made that job even more difficult for themselves to bring that budget deficit down into, as the politicians always say, try and achieve that sense of budget repair. So this morning on the ABC's AM program, Danielle Wood from the Grattan Institute outlined some of those thoughts. Here's what she had to say.
It clearly has a difficult set, but what I would say is I think they've made that job even more difficult. They've tied their hands by saying that they will not increase taxes as a share of the economy, which means obviously if you want to reduce the structural deficit, you're going to have to do all the work on the spending side.
And Matt, just finally, Malcolm Turnbull's come in for a bit of criticism over the past 6 months or so since he assumed the leadership of the country, because he hadn't revealed much policy. Some people say he hasn't revealed much policy, and there's a lot of anticipation about this budget because he said this is where basically that will all be revealed.
That's right. He's described it as a new agenda by which the coalition can be judged upon by voters, because it's expected that Malcolm Turnbull will head to the Governor-General's residence in Yarralumla on Friday or Saturday to ask Sir Peter Cosgrove to call an election on the 2nd of July, which means this is effectively not just a budget, it's also a pre-election manifesto for the government to outline its economic direction for the next term, should it be re-elected. So there is a lot weighing on this, and a lot of people have said that when Malcolm Turnbull tried to take over, and it eventually did take over as Prime Minister from Tony Abbott, he cited a lack of economic direction and a lack of economic leadership there, and said that something needed to change. And as you've pointed out, he has faced some criticism that detail still is lacking. So there is he is talking up this budget as showing his agenda, trying to carve a new path for himself. But Labor will definitely be trying to attach him to the legacy of his predecessor Tony Abbott in whatever is released tonight. And then, of course, we will see Bill Shorten's budget reply speech on Thursday night, where he'll outline an alternative plan for the country going forward into the next 3 to 4 years. So it's all just another part of this unofficial election campaign that we find ourselves in, with 59 days to go until polls open on July 2.
And then the drive to Yarralumla on possibly Friday or Saturday. We'll see what happens. Okay.